So welcome. This is a presentation that is hosted by the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities at Florida Atlantic University and the PEPSA Project, the Partnership for Effective Programs for Students with Autism. Their mission, the mission of CARD, an FAU CARD, is to provide expert consulting, training, and support at no charge for all people across all race, ethnic, and gender groups with autism and related disabilities, their families, employers, the professionals, and community and governmental agencies serving them. FAU CARD provides support and assistance with the goal of optimizing the potential for all people across all races and gender groups with autism and related disabilities. They serve 5 counties, including Indian River, St. Lucie, Martin, Okeechobee, and Palm Beach. They have 3 offices, one in Boca Raton, one in Jupiter, and one in Port St. Lucie, to provide one dynamic service across those areas. Services that they offer at no charge include family and school consultations, trainings and workshops, public education, referrals and resources, adults hangouts, groups, and much more. And I'm Christine Reeve, and today I want to talk about building relationships with families in returning to school and beyond. I run Autism Classroom Resources, a blog and a podcast. I am a board certified behavior analyst with a PhD in psychology, and I've been working for almost 30 years in the field of autism and special education. Have spent the majority of my time working with special educators in classrooms, providing support and training and consultation, supporting students with autism, but also students across the special ed spectrum. And so what I'm going to talk about today is how do we help our students make this transition back to the school year, which I think is going to be a little different than the school years that we've seen in the past. It certainly has been a long, hard road in our last couple years as we are approaching the 2021-2022 school year. I can't believe it's actually that far along in the world. But it's been a pretty difficult last couple of years. And I think we're certainly approaching normalcy, I hope. But as we approach this year, I think there's still a few things that we want to think about. And the first thing I really want to put out there is that I still believe it is very important that educators continue to set as a priority taking care of themselves. I posted this on social media somewhere in the middle of the second semester of the last school year, because I think for a long time when I've heard the word self-care, I've always kind of thought, oh, get a manicure, take care of yourself. It's always been kind of a word that people have used, and it just kind of meant, oh, go have a nice spa day. And that's what people kind of meant before this year. I think we now know that self-care is a lot more than that, and it's a lot more important than that. Self-care really is about setting priorities, and it is about making yourself a priority. And I hope that one of the things that we have learned in the last year is that as educators, we have to set ourselves as a priority. I put this up on social media, and I got a lot of different responses. One of them was, but I can't make myself a priority. My students need me too much. And my response was, if you don't make yourself a priority, you're not going to be able to be there for your students. I think this year has really pushed all of us to the edge. I think it's pushed our families to the edge as well. I think that we really need to make sure that we are making ourselves a priority, that we are taking time for ourselves. And that doesn't mean that you aren't there for your students. It means that you're taking care of yourself so you can be there for your families and your students. So I think that as we head into this year, I think we need to continue to be aware of that and continue to make that a priority moving forward. Because otherwise we're just going to continue to have our educators burn out. And I think that's not something that our field can afford. So as the year begins, I think there's some things that we really need to focus on, and they're going to be the focus of what I'm going to talk about across this presentation. And so the first is that we really want to make sure that we are building relationships with our families. That's going to be an overriding thread that's going to run through the entire course of what I'm going to talk about today. Because building the relationships with our families has always been the bedrock on which we have built everything we do with our students. It has to be the bedrock on which we build everything we do with our students, because we're with them for a short period of time, whether it's 1 year or a few years. Our families are with them for their lifetime. And so our relationships with the families is what allows our teaching to carry on. And so that is going to allow us to build our education. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. We have the transition back into the building. For some of our students, this is going to be building back. It may be the first time they're coming into the building. As we first get to know them, this may be their first return into the building. Some of our kids have been in the building all year. Some of them are coming in for the first time. So for some families, they may have a reluctance or a hesitancy about coming back into the building. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can work with them to make that happen. And 3, I think we have to think about how do we, I think we're going to have some of our families wanting to help support generalization. Certainly in the last year with distance learning, many of our families have seen a side of their children that maybe they haven't seen before. They've seen maybe a side of their learning that they haven't seen before. They've seen them do things for teachers that they have not seen them do, things that they wouldn't do at home. Maybe their teachers have seen them do things for families that they haven't done at school. We know that our students have difficulty generalizing across environments. I think both sides have seen that more starkly across this last year. So we will have some families who want to talk about ways that can help them support the generalization of learning from school to home and really see that need more. So I want to talk about some ways that we can help those families and start those conversations about how they may be able to do that at home. So the overriding element of all of that is going to be building trust. That's going to be the piece that runs the gamut across the whole element. So I'm going to be winding that through. All 3 of these tasks throughout the presentation is going to be based on building trust with our families. That has got to be the element that plays a big role. That's my dog, Lucy. She probably will make a couple cameos in this. I haven't really found a way to keep that from happening. It wouldn't be a pandemic Zoom if we weren't doing that. So we'll be talking about building trust throughout this entire process. Now, none of these characteristics are going to happen overnight. There are prerequisites that we have to think about to building trust. We have to build positive relationships with our families. We have to build mutual respect. We have to have compassion for them, and our families need to build compassion for us because our jobs are not easy either. And we have to support them. Sometimes these relationships have been damaged. Sometimes those have been damaged from things that have nothing to do with you as an educator. They may have been damaged by previous relationships with the school, previous relationships by other parts of the school or other places. Sometimes they're damaged before they ever even have contact with the school system. But throughout all these processes, as we work with the families and the students, These are elements that we really have to strive to foster. We really have to work at building these positive relationships, the respect with them. And we have to have respect for them so that they will have respect for us. It has to be mutual. We have to respect their role in this process as well. So it's important that we recognize that trust is critical to collaboration. Special education, in particular, any kind of education, is built on collaboration. Parents and teachers are collaborating in general ed across the board. But collaboration is particularly important in special education because our students have special needs, because they need all of us working together. And trust is critical to collaboration. Qualitative research actually indicates that trust is a facilitator to collaboration because it enables the participants to communicate clearly, even on topics that might be considered sensitive. And so there is a level of vulnerability in that trust that we both have to be willing to put forward. And that is a big ask. And it takes time, and it takes commitment, and it takes being willing to put that forward on both parties. So I think we need to recognize that. We need to recognize that families have to be vulnerable, and teachers and educators have to be vulnerable. And that's hard to do. I think it's particularly hard to do when we're already feeling a little strained. So just keep that in mind as we go through this, that we have to kind of put it out there. As the professionals, I think we have to take some of those first steps. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on as well. Now, I think that we can do this because I think the fundamental element that we need to keep at the center, and you're going to hear me say this multiple times, is that children are the priority. I don't believe that there's anyone who went into special education without thinking that children are the priority. I think that's why we all do what we do. I think that's why we all focus on what we focus on. Change is the reality. So if 2020 taught us nothing, I think it taught us that. We now know that, multiple changes are the reality. And collaboration is definitely the strategy. I really like this quote. It is truly the quote that I guide my work by. And I use it as my guide because I realized one time when I had a supervisor when I worked at Nova Southeastern who gave me an evaluation. And one of the things that she said as my feedback was, Chris always keeps the child at the center of the discussion. She always keeps the child at the center of everything she does. And I realized that was the biggest compliment that someone could pay me. And that was when I realized that was really the fundamental thing we need to do. So as long as we keep the child at the center, that is what we need to do. So just keep that in mind as we go through all the different things we're going to talk about today. So let's talk about returning to school. That's the first thing. We have to get back to school. That's where we're at right now. We're trying to figure out how to do that. We're all excited. As teachers, at least, I think we're pretty excited at the idea that maybe we could get back to normal. So everyone, though, is moving at a slightly different pace back to normal, right? Different factors are playing into everybody's lives in terms of returning to normal. Some people are comfortable with going back. Some people are rocketing back. Some people are walking a little bit more slowly back. And so I think it's important that we recognize that not all of our families are going to be moving back with the same speed of normalcy as everyone else. Some are already back. Some have already been back to the classroom. Some have not. So I think that is important. Some students were already in school all of last year. Other families may be reluctant, and there could be a variety of reasons for this. Everybody is dealing with very different situations. And I think that that's important. So for all of these families, that means that we have to build the relationships with them individually and find out what they need from us and how we can help them. And it's going to be a different relationship, and it's going to be different for each family. So let's look at how we can do that. So our first step is going to be getting in touch with the family before school begins. So call them or use something like Zoom. Sometimes it's easier to have those hard conversations or those initial conversations face to face where you can see facial expressions. I'll give you some examples. Families have said, one of the things I've heard schools say is they don't think that virtual IEPs are necessarily going away. Many families have said that they really like virtual IEPs. Many schools have said they really like virtual IEPs. I will tell you, as an outside consultant, I would have loved to have Zoom IEPs as opposed to, I often participated in IEPs from afar on the phone. Now, families have said in some instances, I don't want virtual IEPs. And those families are often families that didn't participate by video conference, but instead participated by phone. And so for those families, a lot of times it was because they were not seeing the other people. And I can relate to that because I found that incredibly difficult. Not being able to see them, being passed around on a phone when there's so many other people at the other end was really hard. Being able to see people on a Zoom is a whole different thing. I do much better in a video phone call than I do on a phone because I can see people's facial expressions. So if I have a choice, I will do that. So sometimes it's easier to do that than to have a phone call. So this is a time when you can talk about the expectations for their child. Talk about what they're thinking about their child returning to school. What are their concerns about coming back to school? So that's also an opportunity, if you don't know this family already, to talk about who they are as people. What do they want for their child? Everybody wants something different. Some people want their child to excel at academics. Some are asking that their child learn to do functional kinds of skills. Some are, looking for, more of I want them out in general ed. Some are wanting more structure. What worked for them last year? What didn't work for them last year? What do we want to keep? What are their concerns about coming into the new year? What are they concerned about? Are they concerned about coming back into the building? Are they not concerned about that? What do they need? What do they need in order to make this work? How are they and their student feeling about returning to school? Are they excited? Is their student excited? Are there behaviors or feelings that you as a teacher should watch for in their child? Are there signs of anxiety or frustration? Are they seeing behaviors at home that you need to be concerned about? But also spend some time talking about positive things about their child, because you don't want this to focus just on negatives. You don't want to get into a talk just about all the negatives that have been going on. Talk about what do they want me to know about the positive things about their child. Tell me one really great thing that happened this year. Tell me something that you learned about your child this year. Tell me something that, you really want to make sure I know that's great about your kid. Make sure that you focus on that, because it's really important for you to know that. And it's really important that they know that you know that. And overall, in these conversations, make sure that you listen, really listen. It's really easy to get caught up at the beginning of the year. But I think this year, even though I know that it's going to be that same rush time of year that we always have, where there's never enough time to set up our classroom, I know. Trust me, I've been the administrator who set up the beginning of the year classroom schedule, and I've been the related service provider trying to help people set up the classroom. I get it. I know there's never enough time. But I think this year we really need to make sure that we set aside the time to really listen, because I think there's going to be a lot more to say. And I think we're going to need to really get that information out of them, and we really need to give them the time to listen. So make sure that we are listening, and I'll have some tips for listening a little bit later. Another thing that you could do just to get some basic information, so all of it doesn't need to be spent on that phone call, is send a quick survey to them. Just some general questions. Doesn't even have to be as long as the one you see on the screen. Use Google Forms. If your parents have gotten used to doing some digital kinds of things and they have internet access, send a quick email with just a quick form so that you don't have to cover those basic kinds of things. Some families might prefer an email to a phone call. Maybe that's more time considerate for them. But that's a good way also to find out, would you rather have an email or a text or phone call to get information about school? So that's a really quick and easy way. And then you also have all that information all in one place. Share how you teach. I think this is critical for building both relationships and trust with families. Let's think about what a family is doing when they're bringing their child to you. They are bringing you a child and entrusting that child to you 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's a lot to trust you with. Think about if you have your own kids. Think about what you're asking the teacher to do. That's a lot. That, I think they deserve to know, how do you teach? What's your teaching philosophy? I want to know that you are going to love my kids, but I also want to know that you know how to teach my kid. I want to know that you really understand my kid. I think that they have a right to know your training and your background. And I'm going to advise, don't be shy. I think as educators, for some reason, we tend to be a group of people who are like, I'm a teacher. I really want to help your kid. Instead of, I'm a teacher and I have a bachelor's degree and I'm in school to get my master's degree. And I've studied with this person and I've been training to do this and I've been training. Hey, shout that from the rooftops. You've been working hard and they deserve to know that. Because I guarantee you that if they go to the doctor, they know he's been to school. When I hire people to do stuff in my house, I want to know that my plumber is certified. Why wouldn't I want to know that my teacher is? We assume that people in a school are qualified, but why wouldn't we tell people? It's okay to brag about that. I encourage you to do that. Excuse me, my dog is going to come back now. If I lock her out, she'll just whine and be more disturbing. Don't be shy. Share your training and your background. Be proud of it. If you're a brand new teacher, that's okay too. Share what your training was. Share the things you know about and share the training that you're going to. That's okay. Share pictures or videos of your classroom. Make a portfolio of the things that you've done. How do you take data? Share examples. Share what you do. This is what I do. And it's going to be different every year, so you're going to have lots of examples. So share how you teach. I use a teaching implementation plan. I developed this plan as a tool for outlining how we implement the IEP because I found that teachers had a hard time talking about how we implement the IEP. The IEP, if we think about it, is really a promise. The IEP is like a blueprint of the child's needs. And it's like having a blueprint to the house. I can't live in it. It's nice. I have these nice drawings, but I can't live in it. And that's kind of how a parent, I think, thinks about an IEP. It's nice. It's a promise. And every year they hope that it's going to be fulfilled. But really, they need to know that it's going to be implemented. And they're taking that on faith. And the methodology and the implementation of the IEP is purposely left up to the educators to implement, and it should be, because we are the experts in implementing it. So I designed the tip as a way to help plan out that implementation so that we could talk about how we implement it and communicate across the team at school and to the parents. We need to implement the IEP. We need to be able to talk about how we do that. So it talks about where are we getting so many opportunities to really work on this skill and how are we teaching it? And how am I taking my data? How am I going to show that it's done? So that parents can know, how is this being implemented and how will I know that it's being tracked? so that they can see that it's integrated across the everyday schedule. Share your lesson plans, just samples. You don't have to share them every week, but share how you teach. I think it's important that they know. Make sure that you've got family communication that goes home regularly across the year. It could be a home note, it could be a notebook, it could be some kind of regular communication. Find out from families what they want. Ask them what they want. You may be surprised. You may think that families want a whole notebook of notes written that you don't have time to write. That's why I like the home note where you check things off and then write comments. You may find out that they don't want a note every day because they don't have time to read it. They'd rather have a weekly note that gives them information or an email. So ask them. You may be surprised at what they say. Make communication a two-way street. Have some way. I use the back of the home note for them to give me information so I know what the kid did this weekend so I can ask them questions and know the answers. And don't forget in that information to share positive information, because if you don't, it's just, I'm not going to want to read the home note as a parent because it's just bad news. So make sure that you're sharing positive information, not just when there's a problem. And ask. And one of the things I ran across recently that I thought was a really great idea was don't ask. How you ask this question makes a difference. Don't ask, do you have any questions? Because somehow in our society, or at least maybe it's just me, I have a tendency when somebody says, do you have any questions? I somehow think the socially appropriate response, and heaven forbid I should not respond socially appropriately, is to say, no, I'm good. And so for some reason, when we say, do you have any questions, that kind of leaves people blank, as opposed to saying, what questions do you have for me about my background or my teaching? That invites questions. That's a specific invitation for you to ask me questions. That assumes you have questions, as opposed to dismissing the questions. So think about that. I actually saw it from a teacher who said, that's how I ask my kids if they have questions. I thought that was kind of a cool idea. So then we're going to continue again to build trust across our relationships. We're going to continue this process through the year and build our relationships with our families. As we get to know them, we're continuing to build that trust. And that's going to become even more important as we start to work with any families who are reluctant to return to the building. So as we start the year and we have families that don't want to return or are really concerned, obviously these families may have a variety of reasons. There are likely a number of families who don't want to return in the fall, or they aren't sure about returning. And from my discussions with teachers, most knew at least some parents on their caseload who felt this way. And these are going to be difficult discussions to have with families. They're going to require those relationships, that trust be built in order to help them adapt to the new normal. So as we do that, I think one of the biggest things that we want to think about is to avoid committing what I call assume-aside. We want to avoid making assumptions about what a family or a school is thinking or expecting. I often talk about this when I talk about IEPs, because I think that's where it happens most often. We tend to make assumptions about why people do things that they do. So for instance, families make assumptions that the reason that the teacher can't meet with me after school hours is because she won't make concessions to me. When in fact, it's that the teacher's daycare starts fining her if she's not there at a specific time. And the family, they're committing assume-aside. Similarly, the school makes, the assumption that the family won't meet after school hours, or the family won't meet at a certain time, or the family's late for a meeting because they don't prioritize their child's education, when in fact it's just that their car broke down and they couldn't get there on time. So we all do it. It's natural. So we want to make sure, particularly in this situation, that we are suspending our judgment as much as possible. We might assume that parents who don't send their kids back are just overly anxious. And then we might find out later on that they have a family member with an immune disorder who can't be vaccinated, and that family member lives with them. And that's the source of their concern. Or we might find out that it's the child who's actually concerned about coming to school and that the family is ready to send them back without reservation, but the child is scared. So it's really important that we don't just assume that we know what's going on. It's important that we ask and communicate with them about that. All of us can point to a time in our lives when we made an assumption about someone's actions and then found out that we were wrong and probably felt pretty bad about it. Maybe we assumed they did something that we got upset with them about, only to find out it wasn't their fault. Or maybe we assumed that they thought something about us and we responded with that in mind, and then we found out that we were wrong. We don't have time in our relationships with these families to have that happen. So we can't make these types of assumptions and have it get in the way this year. So recognize that everyone is coming from a different place and everyone has different perspectives, and that's okay. Everyone is seeing things through different glasses this year. Acknowledge that in your conversations with them. Put that right up front. I know that everybody is coming from a different place this year. You can say it just that way. And I want to hear from you. Where are you coming from? You know, I have friends who are feeling this way. I have friends who are feeling this way. Some families are telling me this. Some families are telling me that. How are you? How are you feeling about this year? That's okay. Any way is okay. So share that with them. Let them know that that's okay. So make contact with those individual families. Make another contact with them if they're reluctant to come back to school, and ask specifically what their concerns are without judging. Find out what they are and listen to them. Really listen. Once you know what their concerns are, once you've asked and you've gotten that, had those conversations, you've gotten that information, then you can start putting together some strategies specifically to those concerns. And you can start to individualize those strategies based on those conversations. Don't start throwing strategies at them until you know what those concerns are. It's really tempting to say, well, we could do this, and we could do this, and we could do this, and we could do this. But if we just start throwing strategies at people until we know what the concern is, then we're committing a suicide and we're going to alienate some people. So find out what the issues are before we do that. So one option, once we know if they have a concern about, I don't know what the mitigation strategies are going to look like at school. I'm worried, will my child be safe? If they're coming to school wearing a mask, are other people wearing masks? And maybe you're at a school where they are wearing masks. I don't know. So maybe we make a video of school or the classroom, or maybe their child is the one who is nervous and doesn't want to come back and they don't really know what their school is going to look like. So maybe we make a video of their classroom, or maybe we make a video of them of walking into school. Let's walk into school and show them what it's going to look like, because maybe they're not comfortable coming into school to find out for themselves the way they normally would. So maybe that's a way to solve that problem. Maybe we send home social stories for the student. If they are wearing masks, we send home a social story about that, because maybe that scares them because people look different with masks on. And that can be hard for some of our students. The Autism Society has social stories about masks and social distancing and all different kinds of things that you can download on their website. There's all different kinds of resources out there that you can find. But it might be social stories just about coming back to school, and just coming back to school in general. That might be useful for them. Or it might be a social story about their new teacher or their new class that you make for them specifically. You might invite them on a tour. If they're comfortable coming back to the building, invite them on a tour to come and look at the building and come and look at their class and what it's going to look like. Or if they're really having a hard time with the idea of the student coming back into the building, one of the things that I know has worked in some regions, in some schools, is to bring the student back for small parts of the day. And maybe they come back to a part of the building that isn't the full classroom, or maybe they come back when everybody isn't entering the building, or come back through a different entrance. I know that one of the things that is sometimes scary for people who are either concerned about being exposed to so many people all at one time is not having control over the environment. The issue is not being in, maybe the classroom, but maybe being out in the hall with everybody where I don't know how close people will be to me. But I'm okay if I can be in my classroom and I know people will be distanced. Or maybe it's coming in through the entrance with everybody else. So when they were doing testing, I talked to a lot of teachers where kids had to come back into the building. And so they found that when their parents were bringing them back into the building and they were coming into a room where they were the only one there, they were entering at a time when it wasn't, when everybody else was coming in. They were coming into a part of the building where the other kids weren't, and they were getting comfortable being around the adults. And by doing that, slowly they were getting just more comfortable about being at school. And I think that is certainly something I have felt over time myself, who has been pretty reluctant and hesitant about going back to normal. As I've done it more, it becomes more comfortable. I'm more likely to go to some place where I know what to expect than to go to a place where I don't know what to expect. So to me, if I was going back to a place where I wasn't sure if everybody was just going to be running around like crazy in the middle of a high school hallway, that would be harder for me than if I was maybe coming in after everybody had already gone to their classes and the hallways were empty. So maybe think about bringing them in at a different time schedule at first and letting them get used to it. So think about some creative ways to have them come in for shorter times, off schedule, things like that. So maybe they're not exposed to such large groups of people at first to get more comfortable with it. So recognize, obviously, that this is going to take some time. So it's not going to happen overnight. It is going to be something that is going to have to happen a little at a time. It's not something that is going to, boom, yeah, now we're back. So for these families that are reluctant, it's going to be a process. You're going to have to talk to them, set up programs, set up, times for kids to come visit, set up times for them to slowly ease back in. And so, keep that in your planning, and keep that in mind as we move forward. Also, I want to put this out there that you need to know that you need to be able to ask for help if it's needed. Some of your students are going to have some issues with anxiety beyond just, I'm nervous about going back to school. We know that individuals with autism have a higher rate of anxiety and depression as mental illness. We know that they are more likely to get that diagnosis. And my guess is that we are going to see a spike in that. I think from my experience with my sister with autism, who has anxiety and depression issues normally, I think from my experience working in this field for many years, and my training and background in psychology, that we're going to see some spikes in this as things continue to return to normal. As we start to see things open up more, I think we're going to actually see this number rise. And I think it's important to recognize that, because I think we think that the anxiety push really was while things were closed, and now that things were open, it's better. But I think we're actually going to see the opposite. That's actually when we see some of that anxiety come out more. Especially because we had really controlled environments and now we're opening up again and things are uncertain. That's when that anxiety becomes bad. So I think it's really important that you recognize that we do have a number of individuals that would qualify for anxiety and depression disorders. And that is not something that you, if you are a teacher, would be expected to handle on your own. So you're going to need to know who to make referrals to for help in your system. There may be times that you need to make referrals outside of your school system. Many of our students will benefit from cognitive behavioral therapy. We know that that's an evidence-based practice for some of our individuals, level 1 individuals on the spectrum. Level 3 individuals on the spectrum. I always get that backwards. And some of our students may need some actual desensitization training to transition back to school. Some of them may actually be school phobic by the time we get back to class. So if you're finding that you're not able to help and it's the child that is really anxious about returning, I think it's really critical that you consider that there may be other things going on here and that you ask for help. So I don't want you to think that this is all falling on you as a teacher. This may be beyond your scope. This may not be an educational situation alone. And I think it's important that you recognize that and find help for you and for the student. And that there needs to be help out there. There needs to be a way to find that. So investigate that now so you know where those referrals go to. I think that's really, really important. So again, we're laying the groundwork for difficult discussions by building trust. These are not easy discussions to have with families because you're asking them to do something that's out of their comfort zone. You know, it would be really easy for them to say, no, thanks, we'll stay home. And that may or may not be what's in the best interest of their child. And they may or may not know that that's not in the best interest of their child. Now, then we may have kids that really will excel in distance learning. We will have some students that was actually a good placement for them. But for a lot of our students, it's not. And so this is some difficult discussions that we're having about what is a good placement and what makes sense in terms of returning for the year. And that's about building trust. So when we think about building trust, as we're working with these families, all of our families, I think one of the things that helps us to build trust is to be reliable. And one of the things that we have to think about to be reliable is to do what we say that we will do. Now, it's important. It's not only okay. I really should change this slide. It's not only okay to set expectations. It's important to set expectations. It's important to say to parents, I will take phone calls up until this time. I will return phone calls within this amount of time. I will answer questions up until this amount of time. It is perfectly okay and important. Remember, I told you to put your oxygen mask on first, or I didn't, but I showed you an oxygen mask and I was hoping you get that point. It's important to put your oxygen mask on first. That's what I was trying to tell you about self-care. Part of that is setting boundaries. It's about not answering every email at 11 o'clock at night. It's about saying that some things you need to think about before you respond. Trust me, I learned that lesson the hard way. Sometimes you're better off not responding 11 o'clock at night because the response is not helpful. Sometimes the problem resolves itself overnight too. It's okay to have those boundaries. You are a person. You are not a machine. You need to sleep. You need to have a family. You do not have to be there 24 hours a day. There are times where there is a crisis where you have to respond more than you would like. But on a general basis, it's okay to say after 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, I'm turning the phone off and I'm not responding. That's okay. So it's important. But here's what's important about that. It's important that you set that expectation ahead of time and that you tell people what it is. And then it's important that you do that. That if you say you're going to answer emails within 24 hours, that you answer emails within 24 hours for the most part. That if you say that you will return phone calls that come in after 8 o'clock the next day, that you return phone calls the next day. So it's important that you are reliable in doing what you say you will do. If you say that you're going to send home a home note every day, you send home a home note just about every day. Yeah, you're going to mess up sometimes. It's okay. Don't kick yourself. It's going to happen. You're human. You're also allowed to be human. So that's okay too. But it's important that you do. I know that it sounds like I'm harping on this, but I know too many teachers who think they have to be superhuman, and you are not superhuman. You're a teacher, you're pretty amazing, but you're not superhuman. So set expectations, share guidelines about when you're going to respond to communications, and then follow through. So this is actually in the online folder or the handout that I asked them to provide for you. And it's just a letter. There's an electronic version and a print version. Um, and it basically just says, we love to hear from you and talk to you about your student. But one of them is about you walk your child to class, and that's often the time that families want to talk to the teacher. It's not a great time for parents to talk to the teacher because it takes the time that the teacher is supposed to be instructing away from the students. So that was always a tricky time because we didn't really want that time to be taken away from the students, and it was really easy to get monopolized by the parents, and it was hard to say no. So this became something that we were able to point parents to and say, could you leave me a note in the envelope? And I promise you, I will get back to you when school is done. And the message is, we want to work with your student during this time. That's why we're not talking to you. We're not blowing you off. We're working with your kid. And that's basically what this note says. Drop us a note or leave me a message. Same thing with phones. I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have phones in classrooms. You all are probably, some of you may be old enough to remember that. Some of you are, old enough to know that you have a phone with you all the time. Life is different. Things are different now. So there's one that you send home that says, and of course now we have email, and you don't need to answer email as soon as it comes through. So maybe there's a time that you answer email. So maybe, this one just says, email your question or information, and we'll get back to you in 24 hours. The key again is set your expectations and then follow through. That's how you build trust. Listen and reflect effectively. So these are just listening and reflecting is a way of making sure that you are hearing someone and that you are hearing them correctly. Because it's amazing how many times people say something, but it isn't really what they meant. So when you reflect, you're saying, what I heard you say was, and then telling them what you heard. And that gives them the opportunity to say, no, that's not what I was saying at all. It sounds like you're saying that. And they can say, yeah, that is what I'm saying. Sometimes I will say, I can see you are. And they'll be like, I'm not angry. Oh, because I'm thinking to myself, you're looking pretty angry. Let me paraphrase to make sure that I heard you correctly. Now, what this also requires is that you don't do what we call stalking the conversation, which basically means I'm listening to everything you say and trying to decide what I'm going to respond with. Instead, you have to actually listen to what they say because you're going to summarize it after one of these phrases. Let me recap to make sure that I'm clear. So you're parroting back what they're saying, but you're rephrasing it so that you're really processing it. So you really are listening. You really are taking in what they're saying, and you're making sure that you've got it right. Because again, you will be amazed how many times you'll do this and they'll say, yeah, that's not really what I meant. Because sometimes it's hard to communicate these kinds of things. And you want to make sure you're talking about the same things. It's important. And again, we want to make sure that we avoid committing a suicide because it's a suicide. Don't make assumptions. Don't judge. The more we judge, committing a suicide will kill your trust. Families will not trust you if you judge them. Friends will not trust you if you judge them. And most of the time, as long as you're keeping the child at the center of the conversation, again, that's your key. Keep the kid at the center of what you're talking about. Even if you have different perspectives. I said in many, many IEP meetings, more than I care to count in my almost 30 years. I never get to go to the fun IEP meetings, the easy IEP meetings. I always go to the hard IEP meetings. And I will tell you that I've sat in quite a few where the parents in the school are disagreeing. And I've also sat in many where the parents and the school are disagreeing, but we're not at each other's throats. We're just disagreeing. We disagree about what we think the child needs. We're both keeping the child at the center. We just don't agree about what they need. And I had a special ed director who put it very well to me when she said, due process is just when two parties are saying, we both think this is what's important for the child. We just don't think those are the same things. And we need a third party to make that decision. It's not combative. It's not horrible. It's just different. And we need somebody else to help us figure that out. And when you look at it through those eyes, boy, is it a lot easier to handle. So keep the child at the center and make sure that's your focus whenever you're having those conversations. And again, recognize that you're having those different perspectives, because some of these families are looking at things from a different perspective. Some families are thinking, they want to find out how they can generalize their skills. So I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, but I have to stop right now and read you the cues, the code. So I have to read the code for CEUs now because it's the 50-minute mark. Thank you for participating in this webinar. To obtain a certificate of completion, you must fill out the form at the certificate of completion link provided on the email for this training. Please write down this code as it will be required to receive the certificate. Thank you for participating in this webinar. To obtain a certificate of completion, you must fill out the form at the certificate of completion link provided on the email for this training. Please write down this code as it will be required to receive the certificate. SIJ072021. The code is SIJ072021. And we now return to our regular scheduled programming. And I have to put a timer back on to make sure that I know how much time I have left. Okay. So next up, let's talk about those parents who have a different perspective. I've talked about the families that are reluctant to come back to school. Let's talk about those families whose perspective is that in the last year of doing distance learning, they got a look at how their children were working for the teacher, but not for them, who could do skills at school, but not at home. I really should have put this in the presentation. I have a meme that I put up that said, for every student that I've ever met, and for every student with autism, there is at least one skill that they will do for a teacher that they will not do for their mother. And there's probably at least one skill that they will do for their mother that they will not do for their teacher. I've had students that we have literally hidden their parents in school so that they could see their child do things that they kept swearing they did not see. I have had parents who did not believe us about things that their child did. I've had good friends of mine who have children with autism who didn't believe me when I told them that their child could do something they'd never seen. I have had teachers who didn't believe parents when the parents said, my child can do this. I had a mom who, when I was running a program, said, my child can write her name. Why do you keep working on this skill? You keep telling me my child can't write her name. She writes her name fine. And luckily I didn't say, well, no, she doesn't, because she doesn't do it at school. Instead, I said, come to the classroom and show me how she does this, because we're not seeing this. And so we brought mom into school and said, show us how this works. And mom said, "Oh, I see the problem. She uses a green pen at home. And sure enough, if you gave the kid a green pen, she could write her name. But with any other writing utensil, she couldn't do it. She could only do it in green pen. And sure enough, if we gave her a green pen, she could do it at school. We'd never given her a green pen. So that's helpful information to know. Glad she came in my office and told me that. Then we could work on that. So, that's an issue. So we're going to have families, I think, in the coming year who have seen that their children can do things that they didn't think they could do. And some of them are going to want to continue to work with their children in the way that they did in the last year to enhance that generalization. They're going to want to do more training at home now that they've gotten a taste of it and seen that it's possible to enhance that generalization. They're going to see that their kids can do more if they work with them at home, and they're going to ask for more help. Now, that isn't true for all of our families, obviously. So, I want to talk about developing parent teacher partnerships. Um, I will be the first to say that teaching our students is not set it and forget it. And it is very important that we address maintenance and generalization. We cannot teach our kids skills once and expect it to maintain and move from setting to setting. That's why we do community-based instruction. That's why our students learn things in 2 or 3 different settings with 2 or 3 different kinds of materials. We know these are big issues for our students. We know that learning to do things at home and having that carryover is important. But we also know that not every family is going to be able to follow this through. So that's an important component to think about as well. So we also know that, again, that collaborative relationship with families is really important because teamwork gets the job done. And that's important. We are a team. There's a reason that it's called an IEP team. And it's not just because we have come together as a team to write the IEP. It's because we are the village that makes this child's life work. And we have to think about that. But it is important that we remember that we're talking about voluntary participants only. Some parents are going to want to find out how to help their child generalize skills at home. Some are going to have the ability and the freedom to do that, but others are going to want to do it, but they're not going to have the time or the energy to be able to pursue it. There are going to be barriers like transportation, time, and money that are going to impede that. So be careful again not to make judgments or commit a suicide if families don't participate when you offer this training to them. Embrace the families who want to participate and help them. And I think it's important that we offer different levels of support so that it might meet the needs of families who have different needs that they can access. So maybe we make some flyers that go home of here's some strategies that you can do without having to come into school or watch a video. Maybe there are also some videos that we send home so that it's just a quick video that you watch versus a whole training program. Maybe we have others that come in for the one school night of training that's something they can handle, but it's not an ongoing thing. So we may have different levels of needs, and I'm going to talk about some different levels of training that we can provide depending on what your availability and support is able to do in your school, as well as what is available that the parents can take advantage of. So it's important that we recognize this is a voluntary participants only type of program. Because parents also need to put their oxygen masks on first. Parents have been under as much stress as we have. Families, moms have quit their jobs, parents have lost their jobs, parents are now going back to jobs. There's just a lot going on. And so, it's a shift. It's a shift. And so it's going to be, some of them may start out saying, hey, I got all this time, I want to do this, but now I'm back at my job and I can't. So that's going to be an issue. So we need to recognize that parents also need to put their oxygen mask on first. They need to have time for self-care, and we need to support that, because it is not an easy job being a parent of a student on the spectrum. It's not an easy job being a parent, period, much less a parent of a special needs child. So keep that in mind. So starting out, I'm going to come back to the slide and talk more about it when I get into the nitty gritty. But in general, don't start out with all the hard stuff. We're always going to start out with easy things because otherwise it's overwhelming. We always start out with just simple kinds of things. We start small because if we start too big, it's overwhelming. We're going to start with strategies that can be successful because we want families to be successful. It's the same thing I do when I do consulting. When I go into a teacher's classroom, I don't start with the hardest thing they can do. I start with one of the easiest things they can do because I want them to be successful. I want the student to be successful because that's what gets us on a roll and moving in the right direction. Praise and reinforce parents the same way that we do our students. Everybody benefits from our principles of education that we use with our students. It's not a one-way street. And ask what they need from you, because you might be surprised what you hear. So we'll come back to that slide in a little bit. So there's a lot of different models that we can use of family training for generalization. And I'm going to talk about each of these in more depth, but they range from big, do a formal lecture, parent night kind of thing, all the way to an individual skills training, mentoring process. And there's a lot of steps in between, and you may do a combination. You may have some that you do with some parents, some that you do with others. There are going to be some that are going to lend themselves to your situation and some that don't. So I'll talk about each of them in more detail. So let's talk for a minute about event, or what I'll call lecture training. This is kind of like where we do, a back to school, well, not a back to school night. This is where we do a parent night where we bring in a guest lecturer. So, when I worked at Nova, if we had a consultant coming into Bodwin, we would have a parent night where they would come in. This is when Bodwin does, at Nova, they do a Super Saturday where they have the parents come in and the kids go through activities and the parents go to sessions. And so that's similar to this throughout a Saturday that they do, which is a really cool thing. And they have really good results with that. I often do this as an outside consultant where when I'm in town, we would do a specific parent training night. Now, I will tell you that we often don't get really great results with this, particularly if we do not provide childcare. Sometimes we get better results if we do it during the day when the kids are in school, but then we only get the parents who don't work. If we do it in the evening and provide childcare, we get slightly better attendance depending on the topic and depending on how many times we've done it. If it's the first time I'm doing it, we get more attendance. If we've done a series of them, attendance tends to drop off, partly just because it's not new anymore. They know who I am. So the problem with it is it's a great way to give a lot of information. So if we're introducing a new curriculum, it's a great way to give that kind of information. If we're giving information about IEPs and what an IEP is, that might be a good way to deliver general information. But you're not going to have an individualized discussion about a child and a parent and their child during that because of confidentiality problems. So there you're going to have issues. So you're not going to have individualized training during this type of thing. So it's kind of a train and spray kind of thing. It's a spray and pray kind of thing. We're going to give you information. We're going to hope that it takes. It probably isn't going to do anything that's going to turn around how they interact with their child or allow them to teach things to their child at home. So it's not that kind of training. It's not really going to make a difference for generalization. It might spark some conversations that they have with the teacher. Maybe it sets the stage. So maybe it's what you start with and then move on to a different kind of training, but it's not necessarily going to be individualized enough to make a difference for that child. But it's a good way to deliver initial information. So it's got some pros and cons to it, but not necessarily the final product of what you want to do. Then there's what I think of as kind of your parent night or your back to school night. Sometimes we do it as orientation before school starts. But I really like to do it as a parent night a few weeks into school. Sometimes schools call it parent conferences. You can do it in a lot of different ways. It can be individualized or it can be generic where all the parents come in. Now, it's complicated if you are in a situation where kids are also included a lot of the time, because I know then parents often go to the general ed class for this time and they don't come to your class as much. So that becomes an issue. But I like this, especially if parents are coming in more one at a time, because you can use this as a training time. It can be kind of a cool time to walk them through your classroom and show them the strategies that you're using with their child. It's a really nice time. If you've got more than one parent, you're limited about what you can do individually. It would be more generic. If you have one parent or they come in individually, so let's say they go to their general ed class and then they come in and maybe they come in one at a time, that can be useful. You could use your parent conference time this way if they make parent conference appointments to do more individualized kinds of things. It's a really nice time to say, hey, this is our classroom schedule and this is how Deontay is using it. So he takes this visual off and he takes it over here to a check-in schedule. And so he takes you can see that he's got this picture. And so we're going to the library. So he goes and he finds the picture that says library and he checks in there and he stays there. And then when it's time to go to the next activity, he takes the next one off and he goes to calendar time and he walks and he finds that matching picture, checks in at calendar time and stays there. And so this helps him know what his day is going to look like. And he has a picture for every activity. So he's doing really well with this. And so this allows him to independently navigate through the routine of his day. And so right now we're keeping it on the wall, but he's doing so well with it that we might get to the point where we start keeping it on his desk. Or sometimes I'll move to where he only needs it when he's not doing what the rest of the class is doing, or whatever your next step might be. And this might be something, I know that you've told me before that you have a really hard time with him, maybe with the bedtime routine, that he has a hard time following that. This might be something that we might want to look at using for that. Maybe we could make him a picture schedule. And so it says, brush your teeth and put on your pajamas and read the story. And then he gets to do what he wants to do, which is play a video game before it's lights out. And I could make that for you and send it home. And I can show you kind of how it works. So it's an opportunity to really show them how this works for their child and how you're doing it. And you could actually model with them how you teach it. So if you've got them alone, it's a really good time to show them. You could do the same thing with their communication system. This is what I'm using with him at school. I'm using his textbook and he's giving me this picture to ask for this. So you be him. Show me how you do this. And you could model with them how you're doing that. Would that be something that would be useful for him to use at home? Because I could make pictures for you for things he eats or asks for at home that he would like to ask for at home. And I could send it home to you. And then, we could talk about what would work. That becomes a jumping off point for some of those conversations. Now, again, voluntary participants. So gauge their interest of whether or not they think they can do it. This is a good way to gauge their interest. If this is something that they say, I'd really like to try that, that may be an opening of that discussion. If they say, I don't think I can handle that, that's okay. Or if they say, I'd like to try it, and then you never hear about it again, then probably you sent the visuals home and nothing became of it. And that's okay too. I know it's frustrating, but it's okay. Now, if you're doing it generically, you're talking about what the schedule is and how it works and blah, blah, which also is useful. And then you might say, I could work individually with you on this. If you're interested, just let me know. And then you might set up another time for another session of something. And I'll talk about that in a minute. If you parents are not coming in for this type of session, let's say we don't do it this year or something like this, you could also do a video walkthrough. So you could walk through Deontay's schedule with mom and send it home. Walk through Deontay's communication system and send it home. Just take a quick video and send it home on Seesaw or something like that. I like Seesaw because it's a secure sending system, not the Seesaw classroom platform, the Seesaw portfolio system. You're limited, so you have to erase the videos regularly, but you can do it without having to pay for it, or at least you could about a year ago when I tried it last time. And then ask them what visuals you want them to make. So it doesn't have to be a horribly time-consuming process to show them some simple strategies they can use at home. You could use a behavioral system too. This is how I'm using his token system, and this is what I'm doing. So this is something that you're doing supposedly anyway. Let's make it functional. And it's a really concrete way to show them what is working in the classroom. And by that point, if you do it a couple weeks into school, you're already knowing what is working for them. So it's not, a new thing. It's not, I'm going to do this, but I don't know if it's working yet. You've got an idea about what is working and what's not. You've already changed. Oh, he already knows how to do the pictures. He can read. Now I'm going to move to a word schedule. So I've already done that. And so I know where we're at. The next kind of training that you could do is sending home activities. So something like scavenger hunts. So I have, before, when we first started with the pandemic, I developed 10 scavenger hunts with questions that can be done at home. So they were just, here's some items. The kid has to go find the items. Let's go find them in the house. Then we gather them all up, and here's some things we can talk about. So what is it? What color is it? Which do you put in your mouth? What do you use to wash your hands? Which has bristles? Which do you use in your hair? So they're just things that they're commonly going to find. So it's a way of building vocabulary, but in things they find at their house. And it's a way of giving the parent some information of just, it's more than just naming items in their house. It's talking about them. You can do the same thing if you're using something like interactive books, or just using regular books and put Post-it notes with questions in them that the parents can ask. We know when we read a book with literacy, we do so much more than just read the book. And when we send books home, parents may or may not know how to get a child who is maybe nonverbal or limited in their verbal skills to really interact with it. So maybe make a video of how you do the interactive book with this child, or send home the interactive book and tell them, have him match the pictures as you read the book. That gives them a way to interact with the book with the child. And then just have them send it back. So kind of, send it home as a homework packet to do over the weekend. Or send home a regular book and put Post-it notes in it that have questions they can ask. So it's not just read the book, but ask the questions, or put symbols in the book that the child can do, because so you can actually just adapt a regular book that way. So give them pointers and tips about how to get more instruction out of simple activities. Send them a list of common daily life activities that you want them to do and have them check them off. Have them set the table this weekend. Have them, build a Lego tower this weekend. Have him go on a scavenger hunt outside for these items with his brother. And then have them check that off on their home note and send it back to you. That's his homework this weekend. Those are all ways that the family can engage with learning and generalizing skills that you might be working on at school to build that language, and it doesn't involve a whole lot of you training the family. It's sending training home. Maybe you take a quick video of how you might do a scavenger hunt with them so that they can then see, and then the tool itself has tools to help them do that. You might send home take-home packets that they do, kind of like you would for summer, so that they can build those kinds of skills too. So again, not a whole lot of time on your part. This is an idea that, we've done make and takes for years as part of training. Teachers come in, we do a training, they make stuff, they take it back. We've done it with parents as well. But I really like this, and I think this was a strategy that I got from Lori Frost from the PECS program that I really loved. The idea that at the beginning of the year, have your parents who are interested in volunteering in your classroom come in and do a make and take, where one day after school, you just stay a little bit later and you say, come in and help me make some materials for my classroom, and we'll talk about the materials. The great thing about this is that A, it gets materials made for your classroom with some extra hands, also helpful. But B, it gives you a chance to talk about those materials. So you make the schedules, and just like that back to school night, you can talk about, what are these? How do you use them? How does it work? Why are they important? So you get to do a mini training on what a schedule is. Same thing with communication. You can talk about PECS. Why is it important? How do we do it? All those kinds of things. How does it work? I can model it for you as you're cutting out, and you're not doing a formal training where they're sitting in front of you and you're speaking to them. They're actually holding the materials and manipulating them and sitting side by side, just like our kids, when we teach social skills, do much better when they're engaged side by side doing an activity and then they have a conversation. The same is true with everybody else. People are much more attentive when they're doing a shared activity. So this gives them something to do. And at the end, because it's the beginning of the year and you need more materials, they're doing something for you by making these materials and sharing them with you, leaving them. They're leaving them with you. It's a make and leave. I actually have that backwards. Then, I do have that backwards. Sorry, that slide is wrong. Later in the year, they are doing a make and take. So later in the year, when you've got a handle on what kind of schedule their kid needs, and you know what kind of communication system their kid needs, they come in a little bit later and you say, I know that your kid is now using a word schedule, so we're going to make him a word schedule. Here's all the material. I know that your kid is now using a PECS book with a sentence strip, so that's what we're going to make for him. And they make the materials for their kids and they take them. I'm sorry, the slide is backwards. So then they do a make and take, and you talk about how their child is going to specifically use those tools. So then you've done a little intro, and then you've done the specifics. And again, you can model it for them, or you can even send home a little video of how you use it with their kid so they can even see their student doing it in the classroom. So you've got those ways to do some modeling for them as well. And so if you have families that are showing an interest in that, that's a really easy way to do it, and even to get some materials made for you. So I really kind of like that tool. Another is just to send home videos of specific individual strategies. So this is one that I used not too long ago. Well, it was a long time ago now, because you know how the pandemic kind of felt like we had a year or 2 years, and it's been like 5 years. That's been like 50 minutes. It was before then. It was actually about a year before the pandemic began. It was a mom who really didn't want independent work. And she felt like it was rote work. It was like, why are we doing this? This is a waste of time. Why is my kid having to do this? But we were looking at it and going, this was a student who had no independent skills in high school. She could not do a single thing on her own. And we're like, this is critical for her to get this. And so we started taking videos of her doing this and building her independent work. And as we did that, we started saying, look, now she can do this. Now let's look at what she could do at home. And so mom started using the same strategy at home because she'd watched us do it in the video at school. So she started having her do some folding laundry at home using the same structure, and started being able to see her do things she'd never done at home before, and began to see how it could really help her. And just sending those quick videos home of her doing it was really, really helpful. This is not her in this video. This is actually me doing it with my sister, who was a teacher, who, and it's a kind of a good video. It doesn't have sound. You're not going to hear it. I just really wanted it for background. And my sister won't let me do anything except put her hands in it. So again, doesn't have to be super fancy. Doesn't have to be, their face. Don't have to worry about getting other people in the video. Just take their hands. That's all they need. It's actually to demonstrate a strategy. So if you've got a student who's benefiting from a specific strategy and you just want to show the parents how to use the strategy, send the video home. There's also a number of places that you can get that kind of video online. So, and I've got in your handout a whole, a set of links that you can find on YouTube and various websites that you can use for some of that background information to give you that stuff. Oh, now it's going to start over because I clicked it. So now let's talk about individual training, which obviously is going to be much more intensive. It's going to require some more, support and more time. And it's really not going to be for everybody, because everybody's not going to be able to handle it. And you may or may not have the support to be able to do it. But it's important that we will have some families that this may be something that we need to do. If we are embarking on individual training with a family, we're saying that we're going to do some individual parent training to work on generalization. We may have some students that we write this into their IEP. We have an obligation to train some type of training for parents as part of IDEA. Doesn't have to be this kind, but we may have some students for whom generalization is such an issue that this is something we consider. If that's the case, I highly recommend that we start by identifying roles. Just like when I talk about distance learning, I say we need to identify the educator's role and the caregiver's role. Same is true when we talk about training. The educator's role is to have expertise in the educational strategies and methods, but we need to recognize that the caregiver's role is that they have expertise in the child and the home situation, and we need to respect that. They know this kid better than we do. They live with them. And they know that their experience and their interactions and relationship with them is very different. I have a sister, an older sister with autism. Nobody would have known that she had autism at the time. She's in her 60s now, and she graduated from high school, so she would not have fallen under the autism umbrella. She got everywhere she did because my mom was trained as a teacher, and my mom pushed. My mom and my dad pushed and pushed and pushed. I will also tell you that because she got as far as she did because they did that. But I will also tell you that it was a huge sacrifice of my mother's relationship with her, because she pushed and she pushed and she pushed. They were like oil and water by the time my sister was an adult. It's hard. And so you need to recognize that there are times that there is a trade-off there that is difficult, and families are going to know that, and you're going to need to respect it. So the educator is going to collaborate with the caregiver to choose the tasks and goals that are important to them, as the caregiver is going to collaborate with the educator about that. The educator is going to demonstrate and train the caregiver in the implementation, and the caregiver is going to receive direction, feedback, and support, and give feedback and support as well. Your job as the educator and the trainer in this is to support the family, to introduce new concepts and review them, but to recognize in supporting the family that children behave differently for family members than they do for educators. I will tell you that my sister at 67 years old will do things for people, other people, any other people, people she does not know, better than she will do for her sisters. She just will. She will do what they tell her. They will she with things that she will not do for us. Sometimes she will do things for me that she won't do for her other sister. It sometimes it just feels like a coin toss. Um, so it's really important to recognize that. Sometimes students object to schoolwork at home. I had a student that I had to write 5 social stories, average, above average IQ, graduating from high school, was going to fail high school because he would not do his homework, because homework was schoolwork and it did not belong at home. And he was not going to do it. And it just, that was the literal thinking that we had to work through. So recognize that that is sometimes a blockage you have to deal with as well. So sometimes we need to send social stories home and letting them know that things are going to change, just like we did for distance learning. Sometimes we need to send visuals home. We need to let them know. We need to give the parents the tools that we use to work with the students. So if you know that you're using visuals with the student, for heaven's sakes, don't not send that home to the family. Make sure that you got the visuals that the family needs in order to be successful with the student. So if you're using visuals, send the visuals home to the family. So work with mom, work with dad. Doesn't have to be fancy, just has to be, it could be Post-it notes. It could be, doesn't have to be, specific. Suggest what this activity schedule for home might look like. Keep the parent as much as you can to a specific small time frame. They are going to be, having made many, many home visits in my career, I have many, many enthusiastic families that start out and they're like, I'm going to make a schedule for the whole day. And I've had some families that actually live on a schedule, but they are rare. It's very hard to live on a schedule. Okay. It's one thing to live on them in the classroom. Trying to run your life on them is a whole different matter. Try to start small. So one of the things I say is we're going to start small. You want to expand later on, that's fine. But I would rather have families start with a part of the day, start with a routine, start with a section of the day, and then you can expand. When that works, we'll add another routine. But let's not try to do the whole day, because when they try to do the whole day, it doesn't work. It falls apart, and that's the end. It just falls apart and they don't pick it up anywhere. Whereas if they start small and it's successful, then they add something else and it can be successful. And then they add another small part and it can be successful. So it might be from 4 to 4:20, I have snack. I come home from school, I have a snack. Then I have math with mom. Then I get a video game break. Then I do homework with dad. And then I'm done. And that's okay. Let's just do that. We established that was the time of day we wanted to work on. Let's just do that. If that's successful, we'll worry about another part of the day. Don't try to tackle too much. Then define the goals for the training. I talk about, when I talk about classrooms, I talk about creating a classroom vision and what we're trying to do. When I talk about distance learning, I talk about a student vision and what we want for the student. Let's make for this particular situation, let's just define the goals for the training. Outline what the family wants to gain. What is it that they want? Is it that they want the student to accomplish something? Do they want them to read better? Do they want them to be able to do their math? Do they want them to be able to work with them better? Do they want to manage their behavior better? What specifically is it that they want out of this training? Because that's going to focus what your training is going to look like. If they want it to be behavior-based, it's going to look different than if they want it to be skill-based. Your schedule is going to look different. The strategies are going to look different. The activities are going to look different. That's going to be, so you're going to need to be specific about what your goals are so that that can be the basis of instruction. So how do you use the training goals? Well, focus on it. When you're giving feedback to the caregiver, make sure you're bringing it back to that goal. Remember, We really wanted him to be independent when he was taking care of his stuff at home. But when we're prompting him all the time, we're not giving him that opportunity. So we really have to hold on to our hands and not help him. That's really hard. I know. But if we really want him to be independent, he's got to do it himself. So we got to wait. Waiting's really hard. So use those goals to help them remember to do that. Remember, we really wanted to try to prevent him getting into a meltdown. That means we've got to have that schedule set up before he comes home. So if those are our goals, we focus our feedback back on those goals. Review the goals periodically to make sure it still fits what they want. Is this still what we want to work on? Is this still an issue? Is this still what we want to focus on? Let it guide your development of what you're planning to do. So we're still focused on the behavior. Is this still a concern? Okay, then our next step will be this. So starting, again, this comes back to I seem to be stuck. This comes back to my starting out. Start small. So let's say that we're starting out and getting the student who is not following simple directions. And we want him mom is asking for help in getting him to follow simple directions and be more compliant at home and do what she asks. Okay, well, maybe he follows simple directions, but he won't, do his chores or he won't do his homework. Okay, well, let's back up. And I know that mom's going to say, but he already follows my directions. He just doesn't do his homework. Okay, well, we're going to start small. We're going to start with, let's do some simple compliance and pull out a token board. And just start with, hey, touch your head. Awesome. And pull them all off and just reinforce and get that compliance going so that he gets it. That's important. Back up and let her be successful and let her reinforce him, pair herself with reinforcement and get it going and get it strong. Whoops, sorry, wrong way. Start small. Start a little bit so we avoid that overwhelm. Give strategies that can be successful so that she's going to have a quick win. He's going to get it. He's going to get reinforced. He's going to like it. He's going to want to work with her because it's reinforcing. She's going to want to work with him because it's successful. And that's going to put you on the path to success. Praise the parent. Reinforce the parent. Give them a reinforcement schedule. Okay, if things go well, you can, give yourself a reinforcer and ask what they need from you at the end of every session. What do you need from me to do this next step? What can I do to help? Are there visuals that you need? Is there support you need me to check back in on with you at this time? What can I do to help? So if we think about the modality of the training, we can be creative. Maybe we have the parent come into the classroom. Now, depending on your situation, this may or may not work. It might be they come in during the kids being at recess and you have them come in and pull the kid from recess and do some modeling and training then. Maybe that's not an option. Maybe they come after school. The parent comes in for a training session then. It may be that there's an online session between the parent and the staff. So maybe coming to school is not an option. So you do a Zoom session. It's not ideal because it's harder for you to model, in which case maybe you send home a video of you doing the strategy with the kid so they can watch that. And then you use Zoom to watch mom work with him or dad work with him. Or maybe you make a home visit. That depends on your situation, their situation. Some parents will want a home visit. Some won't want you to visit. Depends on what their boundaries are. You may be able to make a home visit. You may not be able to make a home visit. It depends. And then whatever the modality is, when we're really doing training with families, we're talking about a 4-stage approach for training that's based on behavioral skills training. And this is just a link to an article on what behavioral skills training is. But it's basically looking at instruction, modeling, practice, and feedback. So you're giving instruction and background, you're modeling the strategy, you're having them practice, and you're giving them feedback. Instruction is just giving background information, giving them, this is what the strategy is. It can be written instructions, it can be verbal instructions, it can be a background video, showing them what it is. It can be YouTube videos. I have 30 behavior videos in my resource library at library.autismclassroomresources.com. Behavior Frontiers, if you do a Google search for that, they have YouTube videos you can use. Vanderbilt evidence-based practices. I think I put that in the links in your document that's in your handout. If not, just Google that and you'll find it. Taxi is another one that I think is that I know is on those links. All of those have videos that you can use and send them the link and they can watch them for strategies. So those are really good background information. Then you're going to model. So you're going to show them what it looks like. Now you could use a live model where maybe they're coming into class and you're showing them. They watch you. You could also use an adult to adult model. So you do it with the parent or you do it with a para and demonstrate for them. You can also use a video model, and I really like video models a little bit better. They're quick, they're easy. You can make them really easily now on the iPhone. They don't have to be fancy. You don't need editing software, but you can edit out pieces that are bad or wrong. So when you screw up, you can take them out pretty easily. There are some online videos that you can use. I kind of like using the actual student if I can. The good thing about video models is that they can watch them anytime and they can watch them repeatedly. And that is what I really like about them. They also get to see them with their own child, which I really like the most, is that I really like that they get to see their own student. So it's not, well, of course it works with that kid. That kid didn't have any problems. It's like, oh, that's my kid. So if you can do it with their kid, I think it really helps. And then they can go back and watch, wait, I didn't really see how that, like, what was she reinforcing for? Oh, let me look at that. Let me see that again. So it's helpful that they can go back and see it multiple times. And then they can also show other caregivers in the home. And I think that is very useful. So I kind of prefer video models because of that. They're also useful because you can also use them to train your staff. And if you happen to have made them when you were doing distance learning, which is one of the things I advocated for a lot, then you may already have some. Now, I also recommend, because many of our students are using some kind of reinforcement system, choose a simple behavioral system for reinforcement that your families could use. So if you're using, just like send home the visuals that you're using at school, send home the behavioral system that you're using for reinforcement. So if you're using a working for or a token system, send that home to the family. If you're using a 10 token system, I would send home a 5 token system, just because I would make it easier for the kid to get to the reinforcer. You can send home a 10 one later. I would send home the 5 rather than what I do with the 10, which is I just leave 5 on the board and just replace it with 5. Send home the 5 because they're not going to know how to do that. And they're going to think that you're just taking it easy on them. If you send home the 5, then you say, see, this is the way we use it at school. Sometimes that's really helpful, just to let them know that. Send home the visuals of the reinforcers that you think would work with them at home too. Make a video of how you use it. I actually have a link, I think, of a video that I made. This is me from a YouTube video that I made during the pandemic that you can use of how to use it. And make sure that in the video, you show them how to specifically identify the behaviors that they need to reinforce, so that they know that they don't just give these for completion, that they're actually focusing on specific behaviors like correct responding that they have to give them for, that it's not just, oh, I got to the end of the task and I gave it to you. And if you want, you can use my YouTube video and send it to them or make your own. Demonstrate how to use visuals. That's also in this video. I think it's called Helping Families Teach at Home. It's on my YouTube channel. So there's one about using first then. And then they have to practice. and they have to rehearse. And so they need to practice that skill with you watching them, because that's how they learn. That's how we all learn. That's how families learn. That's how students learn. That's how we all learn. We all learn from practicing, and we all learn from getting effective and meaningful feedback, because if they don't, they just learn to do it wrong. If you've ever, well, in the world of DPS, this doesn't happen very often, but we all need to be reinforced for doing things correctly, not doing things incorrectly. I always think of Irma Bombeck's story. I'm sorry, some of you don't know who Irma Bombeck is because you're too young, but Irma Bombeck is a humor writer. Ask your mother about her. She'll probably remember, maybe. I might be getting too old to even say that. Anyway, she was very proud of herself because back in the days before GPS and you had to use an actual map to find your way around, and she wasn't very good at it. So she moved out to LA by herself, and she was following a map to go to the studio, and she ended up at the beach, and she didn't know how she got there. So she figured out how to get she watched the sunrise. She figured out how to get from the beach to the studio. And so every day when she drove to the studio, she drove to the beach, and then she drove to the studio. And that was fine. She was perfectly happy to see the sunrise every morning on the way to the studio. And then her husband came to pick her up when it was time to go home. And he was like, "Oh, I'm so proud of you. This is so amazing. You managed to navigate LA. This is so amazing. I want to go see the studio. Can you drive me there?" And she's like, "You want to go to the beach?" She was like really embarrassed because she's like, "I didn't ever really find out how to go to the studio. I found out how to go to the beach and then go to the studio." And because she was reinforced, but she was not reinforced for the actual correct answer. She was reinforced for the wrong answer. So you have to actually reinforce the correct answer, or we learn to do things wrong. So that's why the rehearsal and the feedback is so incredibly important. So how do we train? Have the parents observe you instructing a specific strategy using specific lessons so they can learn from you. Have them do the lesson during a school visit or an observation or a home visit. Ask them, if you're not making a home visit, maybe you ask them to videotape working with the student and share it with you. So maybe you give your feedback that way. So maybe it isn't a Zoom session. Maybe they just video and send it. And then you videotape. I often will videotape feedback because it's easier for me to talk than to type it all out, and send that back to them. So that may be another way that you could do it without having it to all be synchronous. Feedback is really important. Giving that feedback is really critical. Ask parents how they want to get the feedback. Do they want it in writing? Do they want it in an email? Do they want it verbally? Do they want it on a video? Try to make sure, just like with our students, get 5 positives for every correction. More positives than corrections works for our students. It's the golden ratio for reinforcement. It's the golden ratio in marriage therapy. It's the golden ratio in just about everything. Clear is kind. If you haven't found Brene Brown, I highly recommend her. It's very useful in this process. Clear is kind is one of the things she says, and it's very, very true of feedback. Don't think you're doing them any favors by hedging and not giving them the feedback that they need. By giving someone feedback there, you're not being honest with them and telling them what they're doing wrong. You're just prolonging the problem. You're actually being unkind when you say, "No, really, it was okay that you didn't reinforce them any of the times you did it right. No, that's all right. It's not really that important." It is really that important. They do really need to reinforce it. "No, it's okay that he didn't have the schedule ready when he came in the door and it took you 15 minutes to get it right." No, that's not a problem. It is a problem. You need to say, "I know it's really hard." You can sympathize. It's really hard to have all that stuff ready when he gets home from school, but it is really important if we want to prevent that meltdown when he walks in the door. So let's try and set that for our goal next time. You don't have to hammer them over the head with it, but you got to be clear about what you need them to do. Clear is kind, because not giving it to them just makes the problem snowball down the road. It's not helping them, and it's not helping him. So clear is kind. Clear, don't hedge. Well, it's kind of like, it's like, "Oh my gosh, this is so painful. Would you just tell me?" On the other hand, Give positives. And positives can be things like, I really like the way you interact with your kid. I know that sounds really, really stupid to some of us. And I say that as somebody who once had a consultant come in and look at my program and say, I think it's really amazing that you have developed a program in which everybody really cares about these kids. Here's what my brain said. Oh my gosh, that's the best thing he can say about our program. We really suck. Okay, I will tell you that was 30 years ago, 25 years ago. I will tell you that 25 years later, less than that, but I will tell you right now, that is one of the best things that you can say. And I have said it a million times to other people now because I can't teach that. And I don't see that everywhere. That is something I really mean now when I say it, and I get why he said it. And I'm proud of the fact that he said it. It was not a little thing. That was good feedback. And that is not a bad thing to say. I think that's a good thing to say. That's a positive thing to say. So think about that. So clear is kind. Just remember that. Don't hedge your bets. And set the stage with the end in sight. So keep the focus on what you're training. Yes, there are 15 other things she might have done, but if we're focused on behavior, keep it focused. The instruction is not what we're focused on. We're focused on giving the direction to get the behavior under control. That's what we're focused on. Start small with those quick wins, which I talked about. Ways that we could start small, start with behavioral momentum. 5 easy things he can do really quickly that we know he can do. Give her maintenance tasks, and then give the thing that he's unlikely to follow. Start with things for independent work. I love starting independent work at home because it's only mastered tasks that I know he can do. And that way he's successful. Start with things you know he can do at school because that's going to make it easier for him to do it at home. Be objective and concrete. So keep your opinion out of it. Not, well, this is really easy for him to do at school. No, that's not helpful. Don't judge. I don't understand why you can't do this. That's not helpful. Just factual. Ask questions. How do you think that went? How do you feel about that? How do you think that went well? I think that went really well. And don't just ask that when it went badly. How do you think that went? And mom may say, I think it went horribly. And I might say, I thought that went pretty well. That looked really good to me. Here's why. That gives you an opportunity to tell her it went a whole lot better than she thought it did. Not a whole lot better than it did. Individualize your feedback. I love this Tony Robbins quote. On newer relationships, give less corrective feedback. You're building your relationship, so tone it down. Lots more positives when you're just starting. It's easier to give corrective feedback later as you go. Validate feelings. So this is frustrated mom and validating Val. So mom is saying, I am so frustrated that we're still working on this easy task. I can't get Ben to do anything I ask him to do. So validating Val, the teacher says, I totally get it. I know how hard it can be to do schoolwork at home, especially when he does better in class. I can share some strategies that worked for me when I first started with him in class. And he didn't do it very well for me either. So validate what mom is saying. It's real. Let her know it's real. It's not her. And watch your tone and nonverbals. Avoid absolutes. I do a lot of be inclusive. I have that problem too. He does that for me too. It's really hard for us to have this go on. Align yourself with feedback. I do that all the time. One of the things I tell teachers all the time is stop talking, talk less, smile more, less talking. And I have to say, I do it too. I open my mouth and I talk and I don't mean to. And when you're giving feedback, lean back. Don't go forward. It's very easy to lean forward and then you're too intense. 10% of conflict is due to difference in opinion and 90% is due to the wrong tone of voice. Watch that tone. I have a friend who says, I heard that tone. I heard that sound in your voice. And I'm like, well, now I really got a sound in my voice because that doesn't make me feel any better. Solving problems, define the problem, brainstorm, pick a solution. Simple as that. It's so simple when you put it that way, isn't it? And finally, just keep this child at the center of it. Remember that children are the priority, change is the reality, and collaboration is the strategy. This has all my contact information. This is all in the handout. I know you guys are going to have a super, super year. I think it's going to be really great. I'm really excited. I'm really hoping we get back to at least some semblance of normal, whatever that is, this year. And I really want to thank CARD for inviting me to talk today. This is all of their contact information for the amazing things that they do as well. Thank you guys, and thank you for all that you do.